Alrighty. Hey everybody, we are the Gelatinous Dudes. I'm Keegan, and this is my best buddy Jake. And we really like talking about D&D. We love D&D tabletop RPGs. We've played it a lot. Been playing together for 10 years. We've both DM'd, we've both played. We've also played a little bit separately. We've played a lot of games. To name a few here, just to, if you're hoping to hear from a certain game, it might be on this list of some stuff we've played. D&D 5th Edition, D&D 1, Pathfinder, Monster of the Week, Masks, Dungeon World, Call of Cthulhu, Vampire the Masquerade, Warhammer 40k, Mothership, and Lord of the Rings, and I think a couple others that we can't remember. So we're going to read some stories, we're going to read some people looking for advice, and we're going to talk about it and hopefully get lost in the conversation because we love talking tabletop RPG stuff. Isn't that right, Jake?
Oh my god, yes.
All right. I have a pretty good first one here that I think will spark a pretty interesting conversation. This comes from Reddit user Durog25. And he says, railroading is not a synonym for linear campaigns. I say again, railroading is not a synonym for linear campaigns. It is not the opposite of sandboxing. Railroading is a pejorative. It is always a bad thing. Railroading is when the DM blocks the players' informed decisions, strips them of agency in order to force the desired outcome onto the players. There is no good way of doing this. Players do not enjoy it when you do this. If you're running a linear campaign and not blocking your PC's choices to inform a desired conclusion, then you are not railroading. So linear when you mean linear, or say linear when you mean linear, I think is what they meant. I don't know where or who started this conflation, but it doesn't matter. But I do not care that so many people are on here comfortable using railroading to mean linear. It creates unnecessary confusion. It makes railroading seem okay when it is never okay. Run linear campaigns if you want. Have lots of fun. Do not railroad your players. I think you made a really good point because I think we do use that term a lot when talking about sandbox versus linear. I think a lot of people would say sandbox versus railroad, which is not always true.
Yeah, I mean, he's not 100% wrong, but I think he's like maybe a little overinflated on the term railroading, because he's using it as railroading is always right. He said specifically verbatim, railroading is always bad.
Yeah.
And it's just for a DM to get a desired outcome. I don't think that's 100% true.
I don't think so either.
I've used if that's like the term, like I've in the Monster of the Week campaign that we played, like I basically had goons come in and kidnap you guys, overpower you to take you to a point that I wanted you to be at. Like
sure,
and I don't think that like took away anything, so I don't think that was bad in any sense of the word.
Yeah, and I mean everybody's definitely seen some like negative railroading, right? Some where the DM forced you to do something or forced something onto your character that felt, that it took your choice away or you had no power to stop it. But I do think that in, especially in games, especially when we're talking, casual games, with your friends, or maybe not even casual, but just, you're not making money off this. This isn't for profit. Maybe you're not recording it, right? I think sometimes it can be helpful to get your players in a spot, to tell the best story. And I think that just comes down to kind of your relationship with your players. If they come to you and said, hey, in this situation when we got kidnapped by some goons, we felt like we couldn't do anything to stop it, then that is a problem, right? And you should have plans for if they do escape the goons, right? They roll well and they outsmart the goons and they don't get kidnapped. That should definitely be a possibility. But you can then also find another way to still get them in that spot. And we've played definitely both linear and sandboxy campaigns. Our Dungeon World campaign, our first one, the continent was called Keldia, very sandboxy, really big world, tons of cities with different stories to tell, and you guys traveled all over the continent doing different stuff.
I think we went to basically every location.
Yeah, I think you did by the end of it. And then our kind of Curse of Strahd style campaign, I ran that much more linearly. There was kind of true vampires, Children of Strahd, that you guys systematically kind of went 1-to-1, defeating all of them before you could take on Strahd. And while there was a map and a continent, I mean, it was pretty clear where you were supposed to go, and that was more linear. But both are very fun, and I think it kind of just depends on the story you want to tell.
Yeah, I think that like when he's talking about railroading, the whole point of like a DM getting a desired outcome, like if I, have someone kidnap your characters, say in especially a setting where you are not gods like D&D, will often have your characters be extra powerful, so that way like things like that can happen.
Right.
Monster of the week, you're normal ass people, you could be stolen pretty easily.
That's true.
I think that the bad part of it is when you take away agency of the player. If you like completely be like, no, you literally can't do anything to stop this. If they're like, I try to fight back, your job as a DM is to find a clever and a way that makes sense that they are neutralized in some way that gets you where you're going. I mean, the whole point of it is kind of to tell like the best story. So like, if it doesn't make sense that like you fight back and beat up whatever goons are trying to kidnap you, I mean, that's
Monster
kind of
of
the
the
way it
Week,
goes.
the game master has a move called kidnap the player, right? Like that's one of the suggested things. So obviously they want you to do that in certain instances, put somebody in danger, separate them from the party in that system, in Monster of the Week, a Powered by the Apocalypse system. But I totally agree. Like, even though it's a recommended thing for the game master, I think it's called the keeper in that game, to do, there's definitely an unfun way to do it, like you said, where if the players don't feel like they could have done anything, but just like you said, in a game where you're kind of a normal person, right? You're an average person going up against supernatural horrors. It makes sense that there's situations where it would be very difficult to fight back or to change the outcome of that. So I think that really comes down to how you present it as a DM, and you have to really make sure to make it fun and interactive, and give the players a chance to try to come up with a creative solution, even if you kind of have a plan for how that is going to turn out, what the outcome is.
And I don't think I agree with that. What he says about like railroading is like always associated with a linear campaign, because we have had lots of like sandboxy campaigns where there have been things that happen that we have no control over.
Right.
And that's kind of just the way that it works. Like a DM is not going to before a session, you're not going to tell me, oh, hey, this thing is happening that you have no part of, and it's going to completely change what's going to happen in the next, 2 sessions or something. Like, that would be stupid to do. So, like, I mean, if you're if you're saying railroading, like that, I mean, that would technically be railroading. So we're trying to pin this as this awful, terrible thing that DMs do to railroad, and I just don't think that it's I don't think that it's like the connotation for it. Obviously, like people have that like stigma that it's always bad. I don't think so. I think that it has to happen sometimes.
Yeah. I think maybe we have slightly different definitions of railroading. I think like something happening in the campaign, something in the background, a villain making a move that changes the world, obviously has, implications on your players and like what they should do next. But I don't know if I would call that railroading. I think railroading is very specifically, at least in my mind, kind of pushing your players in such a specific direction or on such a specific path, that it doesn't feel like that there was any other way for them to go about it. Mm-hmm. And so I think having like your villains, create situations where your players feel like they're now pressured to do something or to face them, things like that. I think bringing the story to the players is not bad, and I don't think it's really railroading. I don't think throwing it in the face of your players and saying this thing is happening and you have to stop it. You're the only people that can save this town, I think is a interesting way to kind of bring the story front and center right into the players' laps, rather than having them go seek it out.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying there, because like sometimes it is kind of hard to get players to like join that little path that you kind of want them to. So I mean, I understand that.
Right. You always have, you know where the interesting stuff is. You know where the good story is as the DM, right? You're like, oh, I have this villain here or this, kind of quest line here that would be super good. And you always want to get your players to that most interesting point. But sometimes they say, we want to go to this other place that you mentioned 7 sessions ago. And you're like, oh, I have no plans for that little town. And so you kind of have to, be quick on your feet. And so rather than trying to force them to go to the town that you have a cool quest in, make that quest a little bit more moldable. Have a good idea for, the setup for it and kind of how it plays out. But, maybe it could pop up in a couple different towns, or maybe that villain can move around and maybe, instead of attacking the city that you thought he was going to attack, maybe attack somewhere else to kind of get your players closer to the action, being able to be very quick on your feet to keep the story really fresh and really interesting and really action packed. I mean, that's a huge skill as a DM that you can always develop.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like, I guess the definition of railroading, I'm a little like not. I like by what I kind of understood from what the person was sharing is that railroading is a way for a DM to get a desired outcome without player involvement, basically.
Yeah, let's read. I can read it verbatim. This is what
Okay,
the poster said. Railroading is when the DM blocks the player's informed decisions, strips them of agency in order to force the desired outcome onto the players.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that probably everyone has done at some point.
Well,
and I don't think it's necessarily bad. Like, even by the definition that he says, like, stripping the agency is, I mean, like, don't do that. Like, don't, if they, like, say, oh, I want to try to do this, like, don't shun it. Like,
right.
You can't just, like, if they're, like, if there's no reason for them to not be able to do it, then allow them to do it, and then it's up to you to figure out a creative way to do what more you're kind of looking to do, I guess.
Yeah, well, he also says forcing the desired outcome, which I think is interesting because as a DM, you always have the setup. You always have like the hook of a quest or a maybe a whole campaign, but typically the outcome is the thing you don't know how it's going to go because that really falls under your players' choices, and kind of how they go about fighting a villain or going on a quest, or they can make so many different choices that would change the outcome, right? Maybe they don't want to kill a villain, maybe they or maybe they want to see if they can change the villain's mind. Like, there's so many things that could end the outcome differently. And so I think that's the important part of railroading is like not only putting your players in a place where the story is going to be, or where a really interesting thing is happening, could be a little bit of railroading. I think the worst form of railroading is when you're trying to force everything so that a specific final event happens. That your story goes exactly this way or ends exactly this way, or maybe you have some plan that, like, oh, if this player dies, that'll be so interesting because of this. And it's like, that is where you can really fall into danger, is because if you try to force something like that, that will feel like it kind of came out of nowhere, or your players had no way to fight against it, and that feels really unfun, even if as a DM you think that it'll make a satisfying story.
Yeah, I mean, railroading to killing a character is fucking wild. I'm sure
I've seen
like, if
both,
you did that, oh my God.
Crazier things have happened for sure. But
just I can just imagine just being like, all right, and then you're standing there and the sword is slowly moving to your face, and they're like, I try to move, you can't move,
you can't, you're paralyzed,
your skull. Yeah, just
we have Revivify, it doesn't work, the gods don't answer you. It's like, whoa, dude.
roll your religion. Oh, your god isn't responding, and then like 5 minutes later be like, I try to heal my friend, the god responds. Like, what the fuck?
That is railroading. That exact situation
okay.
I think is what people think of when they say railroading.
That's like, obviously like a worst case scenario kind of thing. Like that's
but
like
extreme. I do understand like the call as a DM, because there, sometimes you think of a story beat that would be so interesting. Maybe if that player character died, it would be such a good story because he has so many connections, or he has this familial connection or something. It's like, oh, it would be so so narratively satisfying for him to have this death scene. I understand that, and like I feel that, but that's so dangerous, and it's not. I think the most important thing is, as a DM, you're not writing a book, right? You're not creating an ending or a narratively satisfying, kind of event for all these characters. You are guiding them through a story where they make those choices. And if a player decides that maybe they want to sacrifice themselves in a blaze of glory, then that can be very narratively satisfying. Whereas if you're trying to force them to do that, all that, like you said, all that agency is lost, and that's where it becomes very unfun. If you're a DM and you feel that call, to have something like that happen, something that you think would be narratively satisfying, remember to keep your players' agency, to let them be informed on the decisions and the actions the whole time. Don't try to force those things, because otherwise you should be writing a book. Maybe you do have a really good story in your head, but this is a collaborative storytelling game.
Okay, so you're obviously like, so far you've been pretty against railroading. Do you think there is an acceptable level of railroading?
That's a good question.
Because I'm sure we've been playing together for a long time. I guarantee there's at least one time where you've railroaded us.
I wish I could think of a specific example.
I can't think of anything specific, but we played so much that it's so hard.
I know. I'm sure there is a time where I railroaded. I think the thing that I do more than anything else is that I make something so like intriguing that there almost is no other option, right? Like if I want you to go to a city, I'll mention a detail about that city, or maybe an NPC will give you information on that city that makes it so tantalizing that you just feel like you have to go there next. And I don't think that's railroading. I think that's an okay setup, because you don't have to go there. You could go anywhere else, but why would you, right? If there's adventure and treasure and all these, evil to be slain in this town. I think I do that a lot, for sure. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I railroad very often. I do think I am curious what that threshold, though, is of like acceptable railroading.
Yeah, I think MacGuffins are probably more prone to railroading than maybe some other stories.
Yeah, MacGuffin does feel a little railroad. It's like you have to get this thing before the story can move forward, right?
Yeah,
but
that's I mean,
there's still
that's
a
playing
lot of
into what they're
choice
saying.
that.
That's a linear story, but like at what time does a linear story turn into like a railroad? You know?
Yeah, where is that line? I think even in a MacGuffin storyline, which if anybody out there doesn't know, MacGuffin's like you need this item, you need this thing. You have to collect the 7 gems of power to the Infinity Stones, right? Those are MacGuffins. And so if you have this kind of linear story where your players have to collect this thing or multiple things, there's still so many choices to be had there, right? Which ones do we go for first? How do we approach it? There can be a whole mystery of finding the thing first. They don't always know the location. And so I think that is more linear and definitely not railroading. I think if you halted all story progress, until this MacGuffin had been found, I do think that would feel like railroading, even though if there's this massive barrier, locking your players, I think that would
so you're so what you're saying is, if like, let's say players are supposed to get the Holy Adventure somewhere in the mountains by Phandalin, and they choose to go do something else, it's railroading to not progress the story, like not say that like, oh, someone else might go get that while you were doing something else. Is that where you're?
Yeah, I think if you told your players that there's this we'll go with your thing here. There's this, magical artifact in the mountains that they have to get, whatever. And they said, oh no, we're gonna go to this other town. I want to buy some stuff, whatever. I think if you halted all momentum and kept telling them, oh well, really, if you just went back to those mountains to get that holy artifact, then maybe this would work out for you. I do think that kind of feels like railroading. I think if you've presented them with this non-choice, right? The only thing to do is to go get that artifact in the mountains. Maybe that's linear because that is what progresses the story, but I think that feels like railroading. I would, even in a linear campaign where there's kind of a more set path, I still want some freedom to kind of move around and to breathe in certain moments and not just feel like the only thing for the party to do is just keep trekking on to the next piece, next MacGuffin, next moment,
I mean, okay, so I think if, let's say you're in like that kind of linear story, you're making like a linear story. These beats have to happen for the next thing to happen. Like, our party decides that they're going to go to some little podunk town because they feel like it, and they're not going to go after the magic item in the mountains. As a DM, make that item in the mountains that they wanted to get move somewhere else. Maybe not like to where they are going, because that's like a little obvious, but maybe like someone else got there first. Someone that they're like should be against got to it first. I think that would create like a more interesting way to like handle the party getting to be a little bit more sandboxy in their campaign, but still like feel like a need to go get that item.
I think that's a really interesting twist / putting a little bit of pressure on the players. Like, I think if you've mentioned this artifact and it's really important that you go get this, you really need it, and they still are like, no, we're going to go to this other thing, having someone else collect it first, and then maybe they have to track that person down and find a way to get that item now. It's become a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult.
Like in the time that they haven't gotten it, like something bad happens with that item. Someone does something nefarious to kind of divert. You chose to do something that you maybe didn't want, like something that you wanted to do that was a personal thing. I'm putting air quotes over that. And so that quest line is still happening. The world is still spinning. People are still moving just because you're not in the same location. Somebody gets that. Somebody goes and kills a king with it or something, and you hear a story of like that sword or whatever magic item it is being used somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a super fun twist. If you have some important thing like that and your players kind of choose to ignore it, or if you feel like your players are ignoring a main questline thing, I think that's a super fun twist. But also, I think it's important if they do choose to go to that podunk town and whatever, still make that interesting. Make it fun. Give them a fun quest there that's maybe not as serious or a little bit more side questy, or maybe still has a fun reward. And then hit them with, hey, that item that you need, someone else has taken it. You realize, it's in some way that, this is no longer available to you. And now they have to problem solve. And, now how are we going to get it? I think that's a very fun twist. Puts a little bit of pressure on your players to say, hey, we got to make some main story progress as well, though. Like you said, things are still moving. The world's still spinning. And I think that's always super important in any campaign. That's what really makes the world feel alive, is when things are happening all over the continent or the world, outside of only what your players are doing. If it feels like your players are moving around and time is frozen everywhere else, it doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel alive.
You walk into a town and then the NPCs are like, oh, you're back. I can actually live again.
Yeah, and they'll spawn in, they unfreeze, and
it's not saving memory in the level, they spawn in front of you.
Right. That you don't want it to feel like that. That's a very specific video game thing that you don't have to do in RPGs, tabletop RPGs. I think
I'm sorry to tell you, but I may have laid a little bit of a trap for you. I got you to agree with what I just said. And is it, by definition, isn't it railroading? Because the outcome is the same. They get the sword that you want them to have.
The outcome is the same, but you did not. I don't think you forced that outcome. I think they had agency the whole time, right? They chose to
you
do
kind
something
of force
else.
the outcome.
Well, you always know that you're going to get the sword. If you're playing Curse of Strahd, I always know my players are going to kill Strahd. That's not railroading.
Well, I mean,
when they
obviously,
kill Strahd.
like he's gonna kill Strahd.
There's always going to be constants in campaigns. Bosses, items, whatever. I think there will always be some constants that you really want to hit to tell that story. It's just making sure that the players have the agency to get there when they want, or to approach the situation how they want. And feel free to leave yourself some room for adjustment, like we talked about. To either pressure the players or make something really interesting so that they want to do that thing. But I think as long as they have agency the whole time and they feel like the choices they make matter, I think you'll be okay. I think you'll be in the clear.
I think the problem that I have is that defining railroading is impossible, because railroading, like I could, if I want an outcome to happen as a DM, it'll probably happen. I think the difference is that whether it feels bad to it, like it feels bad or not.
True.
Because I think a very skilled DM can railroad just enough that their game is still very fun and they still feel like they can do what they wanted to, but you got kind of that little thing that you wanted them to do. You got them to hit that beat that you wanted them to hit.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I think that's what's most important, is that your players are having fun. There's definitely some groups that, maybe you only play once a month, or even less than that. And it's a lot more about hanging out with your friends and beer and pizza, and maybe those groups wouldn't be bothered by railroading and perhaps need more railroading to make, progress. And that might be totally okay. I think you really need to kind of feel out the vibe of your players, make sure they're having fun, and just make sure that they feel like they have that agency. And I think you'll be all right, even if, you got to make some adjustments and move some stuff around, and, and players want to be where the action is anyways. I mean, every player wants to be, in the town when the dragon attacks so they can defend it. Yeah, you want to, and that.
I want to be where the cool RP is. I don't care about the action.
That's true.
That's just kind of how I am, though.
Yeah. So,
I want to be fighting my bastard child in the middle of the street rather than fighting a dragon in the middle of the exact same street.
You like the familial. You are. I feel always attracted to that kind of those player relationships. Be it familial or friendly or whatever.
Well, it's a lot more interesting. I mean, you can make you can make like a really compelling villain. But the people that are around you all the time is the more interesting part of that, because they're around you all the time. If the villain shows up once or twice during a campaign, like, hell yeah, that's cool. But like, I'm not developing a relationship with them.
I think you totally can.
I don't know. Like Curse of Strahd is a good example. Like Strahd is supposed to show up and like neg you, basically. He's supposed to be like, oh, you guys are cute. Like, this has happened before. People have tried to kill me. I'll give you a glimpse of my power, and then I'll run away again. And then you go and get the next thing, and then he does it again, and then he invites you over. I mean, like that kind of case, you build like you build a rapport with him more than a relationship.
Sure.
But that's kind of, that's different than the relationship part.
I love the RP with my fellow players and stuff when I'm a player. And I love building those relationships, but I don't know. I am very compelled by a good villain. I think that as a player, having good relationships with your fellow players is obviously incredible and super fun, and adds a lot to the campaign. But
I think you just like to play a good villain.
Yeah, but it's all, even as a player, even in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about that next fight with that big bad, and we're really gonna, fuck him up this time. I don't know. I like it, and I think that's everybody will find enjoyment in those different things. We could do a whole nother episode on, role play amongst the party with NPCs, with villains. That's a whole nother topic, but. I think
that's the hook. That's the hook right there. Really,
that's the hook.
That's what really gets you into it.
The RP. Oh yeah, that's for
Yeah.
sure what
I mean,
gets a
there's
lot of
people
people
that
into
just
tabletop
that
RPGs.
just really like the wargaming aspect of like games like D&D,
Mhm.
but
Or
like
Warhammer,
for
like
or
true
Warhammer.
tabletop Warhammer, not the RPG.
True Warhammer, like they like even people in D&D, like they just want that wargaming aspect, and
Some people
like
love
that's
it, yeah.
cool. Some people really like the numbers and trying to the min-maxers of groups. Those will happen
Yeah.
sometimes.
That's a whole. we
That's
got
a whole
so
nother
much here.
thing.
That's a whole nother
Oh my
episode right
God.
there. Is war games versus role play, theater of the mind versus minis. We got so much, but for this episode, I think we had a really interesting conversation on linear versus sandbox campaigns,
And
the dangers of railroading, how to approach it in a safe way. I feel pretty good about that.
I'm maybe a little less. I'm still kind of like, I'm pro minor railroading still, I think.
I think I'm definitely anti
minor
railroading, but
minor railroading I think is fine.
get in the comments. Get in the comments. Tell Jake that he's wrong and he's a bad
I'm
DM.
not wrong.
And,
I just minor railroading.
Let us know. If you have any experience with it, with railroading. Where can they let us know, Jake? How are we going to do this? We need an email. I want emails.
We have an email. I'll put it in the description. How about that?
All right, our
Maybe
email's in the description.
Maybe we'll open a Reddit.
Yeah.
A Reddit page or something, and you guys can post some shit in there too.
Check the description for our email. Email us. Tell us about your experiences with railroading, your preferences for it, linear versus sandbox campaigns, all that stuff. Let us know. And with that, I think we've been the Gelatinous Dudes, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.